Mr. Conor Dubin, man of many talents. Obviously, you started out as an actor. What led you to doing the Kate series?
I was actually having a conversation with a friend one night on the phone. She just broken up with someone, and we got off the phone, and I felt really bad for what she was going through, and I was thinking about my own relationship history, the things I'd been going through, and just that idea, like, well, what if we're all trying to figure this out, this relationship thing? What if we were just taught better about it? And that led me to the question of how do we teach kids about relationships? And then I discovered that we don't at all. And there's no real stories for boys. And, the only stories that I think even touch upon the subject of any kind of partnership is the princess stories for girls. And they seem like a very dangerous narrative. The girl seems to always be alone. She's orphaned in the first pages of the book. She doesn't really do anything. And there's always an old person who's trying to kill her or put her to sleep or something horrible. And, who wouldn't want to be saved out of that situation? It's a miserable place. And then one person shows up, and then that's the person you choose. And that's when I really started looking at it, and I have nieces and nephews, I was like, this is really a dangerous narrative. So I wanted to see if there was anything I could do to sort of just change that.
Yeah, I love that you are going like the anti-Disney narrative, and it's funny because you don't realize it on the surface. You see these kind of princess stories, and you don't realize how disempowering the story really is. And it's not a celebration of a young woman or a woman and their strength and how they've relied on themselves to overcome it. It's, oh, I'm helpless, and this prince has come to save me, and now everything is quote unquote better.
Correct. And I think what may even be more sinister is that not only is it disempowering, it's disempowerment packaged as empowerment.
Sure.
Which is really confusing to people, because you're signing on to something that you think is supposed to get you empowerment, and you're playing by all the rules, but you're ending up disempowered, and you can't figure out why, because you did everything right.
Right. And it's funny because I think all of these companies have tried to do a better job when you think about representation, body type, body image, all of those things, but there's still a huge part of the narrative that they're missing, clearly. So I think that's a cool thing that, got you into doing the whole Kate series, which is amazing. It's about, a girl who, and there's a clear progression as well, where she kind of figures out in the first book who she is and what she's made of. And the person who's championing her on is her grandfather at that point. And she kind of finds her own way. And then I love how then it goes into the second book is about relationships and marriage, which I think is never touched on, especially in a negative sense. No one's ever like, oh, you know what, we took a wrong turn, and like, how did we get here, and what did we do to get out of it? I think that's a really wise way to put it forth.
Jellyfish Island, the second book.
Yeah, that's the one.
That's really when I wanted to. So after I wrote Kate's First Mate, and he brought up the grandfather, I didn't want my lead girl to be an orphan. The orphan narrative is really helpful if you're writing, as comic books, all of these people that are sort of disenfranchised or left alone, because it can kind of jumpstart a kid's imagination. I'm alone. All of us. There's no parent. There's no identity. So it opens them up to an identity. It's a real cheap tactic, and it's also very scary. So I like the idea of the relationship between Kate and her grandfather. There is the old person. Old people aren't bad. They're not trying to kill you. In fact, they're very helpful. So he represents the love, and our grandparents teach us morality. And it's so important to have a relationship for a child with a grandparent or somebody older, because our parents are too worried about teaching us how to, not burn the house down. Grandparents have the time to be calm and teach us morality. And if we want a moral culture, we're going to need a culture that our children have a relationship with older people.
To your point, I mean, my grandmother raised me, so I completely can get on with that story.
Wow.
And it was the looking back on it, I'm like, wow, I'm so thankful because she was born in 1921, so it's this Depression era.
Mm-hmm.
It was not the helicopter parent, that all of my other, contemporaries kind of grew up in, with these parents who were overbearing and worrying about everything. My grandmother taught me how to cook. She taught me how to clean. She taught me how to sew. She taught me how to do it, like actual life skills. And she was also an incredibly, incredibly hard woman and the most disciplining woman to me as well. But I learned, like, okay, someone can love you and also be serious with you and discipline you. And just because they discipline you doesn't mean they don't love you. And I think now it's like, you can't say anything to anybody these days without them getting offended or getting hurt, or, there's this victim mentality that is very prevalent in today's society.
I completely agree. And it's not it. I think it was done out of fear, as a lot of, a lot of, what do they say? The road to hell is led with the best of intentions. So there's been so much protection to children that I don't know, what you see around you, but I don't have, most people don't have a coming of age experience. They haven't downloaded the update of being an adult. So we have people in their 30s and 40s walking around like children.
Sure.
And that's scary. That's part of the journey of Kate and being a sailor, is that this is a coming of age experience for her. And the things, she gets older throughout the series. The design is a little different. She's a little more confident. She grows with each new experience. But to your point, that is, we've gotten away from, we're imagining discipline or raising a child in that way is a negative thing. And it's so important. I mean, Native American tribes would take their children out and leave them in the woods. You grow up quick because it's important to be part of your tribe, of your family, in order to be a valuable part and not a drain. And if you have a bunch of adult babies running around, then it's a drain.
Yeah, there's an amazing book. I don't know if you've ever read it. It's called The Coddling of the American Mind.
I have not.
Oh my gosh, you should read that, because it talks about what you are instilling in Kate is this. They have this term called free range children, and how kids in the 70s and 80s, they would go and they talk about a person growing up in New York and a child who was riding the subway at 10 years old, and it helps. The thing is that the protection that parents, and I'm a new parent. My son is now 2 and 3 months, and letting them explore what. They are going to fall. They are going to hurt themselves. They are, and they have to. And they also have to know what their limits are. Because if they don't know what their limits are, or their boundaries are, I've noticed that my son feels way safer when I put structure on them. He knows, like, I am very structured, and this is what it is, and he knows there's love within that. But then he'll start to do some, like, where he's, especially at his age, he's flexing his independence, right? And I have to let him kind of go through those motions and not try to hold him back. And, like, if he's going to fall off something, he's going to fall off something. And that is how you learn. And I think that's the part, like, everyone wants to bubble wrap their kids and not be offended, not want them to get offended by anything. And, like, that's how you grow. Like, you grow through civil discourse and people disagreeing with you and people saying, oh, that's actually not a good idea, or this is a good, there is none of that anymore. And that's the shame.
And I think if people knew the long-term ramifications of having a bubble-wrapped child,
well, we're seeing it. The helicopter generator, yeah.
How destructive that is to the internal mechanism of the child you're raising. There's no consequence. They don't understand the value of a correct decision versus an incorrect decision. And with the books and Kate having to choose from all these different characters. In the princess story, you're so alone. No one loves you. You have no parents. And one guy shows up. Of course, you're going to spend the rest of your life with him. There's no one else. And there's also no consequence to a bad decision. But Kate, as a sailor, she inherits the boat from her grandfather and sails around the world. And when he retires and she is hiring her first mate, one of the guys almost crashes the boat. That's a, immediate red flag. And hopefully the child or the reader, can immediately say, oh, not everyone's a right fit. And this is why. Because this is what I love to do. It's more about her passions in life that are informing her decisions rather than being lonely and empty.
Yeah, and I think that to what you just said too is like being able to understand that just because you made this decision, you're not stuck with that decision. Speaking of someone, I've been married and I've been divorced, and I understand, like, you have this notion too. You're also raised with, like, you're going to find this one person and they're going to fulfill all your needs, and that's like, you're going to put all this stuff. And I don't think anyone's equipped to handle that in a relationship. And if you don't know yourself and you're trying to offload all your bullshit onto someone else, like, it's never going to work out.
No, especially in a bubble wrapped,
Exactly.
generation, because no one knows themselves. They're all figuring it out. But then there's an element of narcissism, I think, that is pretty prevalent now, that, is a new thing. There never used to be a selfie culture. I don't think, your grandmother probably never took a selfie in her life. So that idea that we value how we look at ourselves, it's very dangerous. And I think we're seeing how it's playing out. I just did an interview with Authority Magazine about the epidemic of loneliness.
I was just about to ask you about, that was my next.
Yeah, it's and I didn't know when I started writing. It was really just about my experience in what I had seen. Kate came out in 2012, and it was just a relationship narrative. And then I started slowly seeing this loneliness epidemic, and I would read the articles, and then I started saving all the articles, and then the divorce rate an all-time high, or deaths from suicide and alcohol, and something is culturally wrong. And we all like to say, isn't it weird? Isn't it weird? At a certain point, I think we need to get really serious about, there is a problem, and there are solutions.
Yeah, how do we transform "isn't it weird" into, okay, let's take ownership and action for, so it's not, weird. It's like, oh, okay, here's an issue, here's a roadblock. Let's figure out how to move forth from that. So what else did you discover about? I mean, especially now we're all being told, especially in LA County right now, it's like shelter in place, be by yourself, don't be around other people. You're not going to have the social connections you're going to have. I was just on the news this morning talking about, yes, I understand that we're in a very serious situation. There's a really terrible disease out there, but everyone's focusing so much on this one thing. They're not talking about alcoholism going through the roof. They're not talking about spousal abuse, child abuse, suicide, all these other things that are on the rise. Like, how do we combat that loneliness?
Well, I think we need to identify all of the areas that we are subscribing to loneliness personally. I don't think the war without can be won until the war within is won. So all of us should look at our own lives. Where are we missing the mark showing up for ourselves? And this, back to that bubble wrap generation, it's a generation of people that don't take personal responsibility. We need to take responsibility for our neighborhoods, the people in our lives. And if we see a cultural problem, take a responsibility in trying to change the culture, because it's obvious who's ever in charge, or who's ever feeding the narrative, or who's ever telling us to pay attention to the things we're supposed to be paying attention to, are, number one, distracting us from something else. I think we just touched on that. And number two, they have a reason for us to pay attention to certain things and not attention to other things. And this COVID lockdown, which has all of the trappings of a very isolating, fearful situation, and when you're operating from a place of fear, you see things differently, you act differently, you are very malleable. You can be convinced of pretty much anything. PR, marketing firms use the tactic, you're all alone, you're over here, all these people are doing this thing. It's an amazing way. It kind of taps into that your ancestral tribal DNA, where you don't want to be away from the tribe. You don't want to be isolated, because that's
The FOMO.
death. Yeah, but it's part of our genetics, because if you left the tribe, you died. You were in the woods alone, and they moved on. So you want to always be part of what's going on. So this loneliness, that's kind of like, being mandated. It's like you're going to be isolated. That puts people in a state that's much different than a state of love, of abundance, of possibility. And when you ever felt like that, or been around family, or been around, your friends and you felt really good, you see things differently. There's different possibilities. Fear is very limiting. It's very lacking. Love is very abundant. So, yeah, that's where I think we all need to really focus and say, where am I vibrating right now?
Yeah.
And how do I feel good?
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
am I fitting in? Not am I doing what's right? Do I feel good? Really get in touch with how we're feeling and then talk to your friends. Hey, are you feeling good? We need to be able to work out these problems.
Yeah, and I think the notion too, like it's everyone is so, I think, obsessed with they have to feel this median way. Or everyone thinks they always have to be happy, and we haven't learned how to deal. And I suffered from really bad anxiety to learn how to meditate and kind of take my head out of it.
Sure.
And I think people need to understand that both things are fleeting, right? Like the happiness is something that comes and goes, but and also the depression, and people get locked into this depression. The more that we're disconnected, it's this vicious kind of repetitive cycle in your brain of telling you like this is how it's always going to be, this is how it's always going to be. And unless you have those people around you to kind of pull you out, because even when I've had shitty situations, but I've been around my family, I'm like, it's okay. Like things are fine. But I moved away when I was 18. I started a whole life across the country. My family's in Detroit. I didn't have that support system. So you start looking for other things. You start looking for drugs and alcohol and other friends that kind of will make you feel better in that moment. So I love that you're putting this positive self-affirming action within Kate.
And thank you. And the second book, like Jellyfish Island, that after I finished Kate and started moving in, that was going to be it. I was just going to write that one book about relationships and move on. But then what, like you're talking about, the fear and the anxiety and the depression. If you ever suffered from depression, if you've ever dated somebody that suffered from depression or married somebody, there's nothing you can do about it. And it's an unfixable problem. And that became another kind of important topic that I was like, I need to tackle this one too, because there's only so much you can do with communication. But if somebody is imploding from within, or if you're imploding from within because of a mindset, you're gonna break up. You're gonna have a dissolution of partnership. So for me, that was all about fear, something we're not addressing. That's how they get caught in the fog, and that island, it comes out of nowhere. They crash. And even Nate says that, this island is not listed. I didn't know this was going to happen. And that actually came from a very good friend of mine that I was talking about depression and anxiety. And she said, you should put something in there about how they didn't know it was going to happen, because it just shows up out of nowhere. And then you start realizing this funk. And they trudge through that island, and each path is leading them around and around. And then they finally get out of that. They get out of the path they're supposed to be on, like we were talking about before, falling. They go through the reeds and they realize, oh my God, I've been this jellyfish my whole life. I've been waiting for other people to make my choices, either by actively surrendering that power within me, or by not making a choice, I allowed somebody else to make choices for me. And the power of a choice-directed life. You said meditation has worked for you, and certainly meditation and spirituality. But part of that book is things in my life where I've woken up with an intention and I created a day based on my thoughts. And when that magic starts happening in life, you realize there's nothing to be depressed about. You're living in one of the most creative, abundant existences of possibility. It's fantastic. I remember one time I was really having a bad time, and I like to scuba dive, but I hadn't been diving out here. I just moved out here, but like you, I'd moved out here, didn't have a big friend base. So I joined this dive company and went out to the Channel Islands and took a boat. And I was, I just couldn't. I've got my scuba gear. I'm on a boat. I'm supposed to be feeling great, and I'm not. I'm still in this funk. And I was all alone on the bow, and this fish just jumped up and flew across. I've never seen a fish fly. Like, it flapped its wings, and it flew 200 yards. And then I was looking around. Did anyone else see that? And then another one came up, and I was blown away. And that's what brought me to a place where I was like, wow, fish know how to fly. And that, I put flying fish all over my book for that reason, because I couldn't believe it. I was like, that's the coolest thing. How could you ever be depressed if fish know how to fly?
I love that. So I guess my thing when I was kind of analyzing, you and how you got here is it's interesting that you're a guy writing for a young princess story, for this very kind of female empowered narrative. Like, what was what was kind of the impetus for the whole thing? Like you said, you had family relatives, but like really what made you sit down and be like, I'm going to write strong female lead character instead of making it about boys and how boys should treat women? Like, I don't know, maybe that's the next, maybe there's another diversion there.
Well, there is an old axiom in propaganda, which is, first you get the women, then you get the children, so follow the men. Which is a horrible thing, but marketing, manipulation, that whole program has done a lot of research into how we operate. So if I'm going to fight the culture, I need to use their paradigm. So I wanted to write for girls, because if we can build a community of very strong, very empowered women, then the men will show up. But ultimately, culturally, men will adapt to the female culture where it's needed. And I think we're seeing a lot of that right now.
I love that empathy is a huge part of you, and I don't think that's something that's taught or acknowledged enough.
Yeah.
Explain like what that mean, what empathy means to you and why it's so important.
That's a crazy one. So the third book is Princess Irene and the Search for Pet Hammy, and Pet Hammy is an anagram for empathy. So that came from a lot of research, and that came from a graduate MBA. So I'd left the acting, and I got and from a place where you're creative all the time, and I went back and got an MBA, and I was in business school, and the way they talk, and they're talking about corporate finance, and it's ruthless. It's a ruthless world. And I had been doing some research on the side about CEOs, politicians, people in really high levels of power, and what the common theme, and it isn't an Ivy League education. It isn't a 4.0 GPA. A lot of them dropped out of college. A lot of them have C averages, but the most common theme about very powerful people is that they tend to be sociopaths. And there's a very good reason for that. Because
I know a few.
If you're going to say you have corporate America, and is basically a pyramid structure. You start out here, you move up to middle, vice president, they give you all these beautiful titles: vice president, senior vice president, president, director, co-director, whatever. But at a certain point, you're pretty much at a tier where everyone on your tier is of like education, like experience. And the only thing that's going to move you from that level to the next level is, are you willing to stab your friend in the back for their ideas?
Ruthlessness, yeah.
Ruthlessness, right? Now that is a paradigm that happens to benefit men much more than women. Because, not that men are sociopaths, but men just don't have the reservoir of empathy that women are designed with. It's in their DNA. The Dalai Lama has said that women carry the empathy for the planet. That we need that every culture that takes care of their women, but understands that empathy is important, and to foster it is as a moral society, a society that's going to be peaceful most of the time. So,
well, how many women have started wars?
Right, but sociopathy can be on either side.
I'm saying it doesn't really. You don't really hear that narrative, right? There's not like
don't hear the narrative. No, you don't. But anyone can lack empathy. It's just men tend to have a smaller area of their brain that's dedicated to it. Probably because, along the way you're a hunter, you got to kill an animal, drag it back. You can't sit there and cry over it. I don't know. But as I was, and I grew up during this, the era of feminism and equality and empowerment. But what I saw, the narrative always seemed to say, well, this is going to be empowerment, equal pay. Yeah, 100%. Equal titles. But everything seemed to be like, have to do with this corporate structure.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, are we pushing an entire gender of people into a pyramid that's inherently designed to destroy empathy? And if that's what's happening, it's very sophisticated. If women carry the reservoir of the empathy for the planet, and we're saying empowerment is to rise up in a structure where it's going to destroy your empathy if you want to succeed, and succeeding is empowerment, then we've ultimately destroyed it for the planet through the paradigm of empowerment. So that's where that book came from. It was a wild idea, but I had sort of convinced myself if I was going to write another book, it was going to have to do with that, but I had no idea how to do it.
Do you have any empathy thought leaders? Is there anybody in the business world that you're like, that person's actually doing it right? That person has a good message. They have a good story. They are trying to do good in the world. Because you see the people at the top, and you're like, you got the Bezos and the Zuckerbergs, and speaking of Zuckerberg, I mean, keeping us connected with the most lonely we've ever been.
Right. I think there are thought leaders. There are people that value empathy, and whether it is abundant in them or not, they do. It's understanding that if you don't have it, not a lot of it, it's important, and we need to empower those people that have it. And maybe jamming an entire culture of people into a male-dominated paradigm that's inherently there to promote people that lack empathy, that's not equality. That we need to create a separate paradigm where people that are empathic or have empathy are promoted, and that is important.
Explain to me, because one of my favorite lines of, I think it's Jellyfish Island, is your choice is your voice. Is that from Jellyfish Island, or is that from the other one? I can't remember.
No, that's from Jellyfish Island.
Yeah, I just love that. I don't think people think of that message strongly enough, and they don't realize any connotation of their voice actually being heard, and they're choosing to make that statement. So I want to hear what your thought is on that.
So that comes after Kate, faces Captain Fear. And for me, it was part of my experience. So the first part of that note, it's a note Grandpa Roy leaves in her pocket. And it says, sometimes you'll feel strong and sometimes you'll fake it. And that was an experience I had when I had left, entertainment and started, going back to school. I just remember having a horrible withdrawal. I'd spent my whole life in this creative path, and it just didn't serve me anymore. And if people don't know what Hollywood is like, it's a very crazy place. It's not as creative as I thought it was going to be. So, and there's, you don't have a lot of control, and there's a lot of vultures. So, but I had left a career that's all I wanted to do. So I was losing an identity, really, which made it really difficult. But I just remembered, in my heart saying, I need to do this. This is important. But there were days that were really tough, and I had to fake it. And there were days I felt great. And then when I got through it all and looked back, and I that's an important lesson. That you're not always going to feel strong, but you're going to get there. So sometimes you got to fake it. We all fake it. I mean, if you could be an adult and tell a child, sometimes you fake it. And that's part of it. I don't feel good today, but I'm going to still go for it. But it's the making the choice to keep going that is what gives us our voice. So that's where that came from, that idea that your voice is who you are. It's your truth. And your ability to choose the things you want in life is your way of exercising that power of speaking your truth, so to speak.
Yeah, your story really resonates with me because you take all this creative energy, and for me, like I feel like we live in this society. Anyone who's been in or around Hollywood, and you think you've got this, you put all this creative energy into this, and you find yourself asking for permission all the time, and you're always waiting for someone else's approval, and you're always going into a room and having people stare you up and down, and you could give an amazing performance or whatever it is, and they're like, you have blue eyes, you have green eyes, you're not tall enough. It's so many other things, and I realized this like from an amazing acting coach, to not take that stuff personally. And when you finally realize you're just doing what you need to do, and if they like it, they like it. That's a good metaphor for life. But I love that you've taken all of that creative energy, all of those drives, and funneled into something that you can control. You've created, it's yours, and you decide how it gets put out into the world. And I don't think people take ownership of that enough to be able to for me, this is how I started this podcast. I was like, fuck this. I'm not going to sit around and wait for someone to cast me as a host for this or do that. Like the world we have, that's where technology is a plus for us, is that you can create a book out of thin air. You can write a book and no one can take that away from you. That'll always be, that series of books will always be your books. I can create this. That's the nice thing. And I don't think people understand that they have the license to do that, or how do we empower more people to have the license to do that?
Well, I think the first way that we can empower people, if there are people watching this, I mean, you probably feel amazing right now. You created something and it's yours, and you have lived an experience where you thought you would be created, but you were not in control at all.
Right.
It feels good to make stuff. It feels really good and really empowering. So I think if anyone's on the fence about whether they should, dive right into creating, go for it. It's going to feel great. And you're going to learn so much about yourself. You are going to have to show up for yourself in your lowest moments. You really stare at yourself in the mirror, really, and you scrutinize a lot of stuff. And I think if you're going to be successful, you start to cut yourself a little bit of slack, which is an important life lesson. You start to realize that you need help. I could not have done these books without these amazing artists, Natalia Baccara and Brandon Ultraman. And I'm so grateful for the gifts they gave me. And part of their artwork kind of informed when I was writing. I would say, well, I don't know where I'm going, but I know once I see what you've done artistically, I'm going to get an idea. So kind of part of my writing experience is not pressuring myself to have the whole thing figured out, because I want to borrow from everyone's creative energy. So it kind of becomes a collaboration. There's that page in Jellyfish Island where they come through the reeds and they're staring over all the jellyfish floating around. When I got that back from the artist, I was blown away, and I had to write her this letter.
There's like a million jellyfish across the page. I mean, everyone needs to get the book to see it. It's the artwork is really stunning.
Yeah, and to your point, to what you're talking about acting, because I'd thought about that before, before we did this, and I'd written something down because, as you described that experience of, there's constant rejection. You're always trying to show up, put on your best face. You don't usually get the part. You usually see who got the part, and you're like, what are you talking about? I'm so much better than that. You learned so many great lessons in that experience. And, I'd gone through that, and I was like, God, it'd be great if everyone could experience that, sort of these lessons we learn and the things we do, but not everyone's an actor. However,
they do it through dating, though. They meet.
Exactly. It's exactly what it was. I was like, perfect. Everybody dates. And that's the same experience. You're constantly rejected. You see the guy that got the part or the girl that got the part, and you're like, what are you talking about?
I was so much better than
this. He's got brown eyes. She said I didn't like my brown eyes. I mean, then they get canceled and you feel great. Their show goes off the air. They break up and you're like, You're following them on Instagram like you're watching the TV show. You look at their vacations together. It's crazy. But it's a great way. It's a great prism to look at life through, because you start to learn the self-confidence. You start to learn, hey, not everyone's right for you.
Yeah.
And it's way better to be alone than in a bad relationship. And it's amazing to be in a good relationship.
So speaking of relationships, how's your dating life been since you moved to LA?
Well, I have a sort of a personal constitution not to talk about
Fair.
any sort of relationships.
Fair enough.
It's fine. I'm very happy. I just, I get to speak on my behalf about things, and I don't want to talk about other people because
They're not
they
part
could
of
be
it.
like, I didn't say that.
Yeah. Fair enough. So how do you show up every day? Do you have a process? I know there's people who are like, a friend of mine, Penelope Lawson, who was on the pod, she's an amazing female director. And she said, like I carve out these 3 hours every day and like, no matter what, I'm showing up and I'm just banging out something. And like those little nuggets might turn into something or might not be anything, but the process is so important.
Mine is a 20-minute process. It just gets the ego out of the way. It's limited. I'm not trying to write a book every day. I am trying to write every day. And I'm not trying to show it to anybody.
Sure.
When something comes up, like an idea like pet hamming, where I said, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to write a book that shows that real empowerment would be to celebrate empathy, and not jam everyone into a male-dominated paradigm that's going to destroy empathy like we're doing with corporate America. Okay, fine. Oh, how do you even begin, right? So, the way that idea came to me, I'll just give you this story because it will shed some light onto the book. But I like to mountain bike a lot. That's something I love about Los Angeles. It's great mountain biking. So I've been mountain biking, and I was sitting there meditating in the mountains. You can appreciate that, and just thinking like, hey, I want to write this book. Just kind of putting the information out there. I don't know how to do it. I have no idea where even to start. But I'd like some help. So, send me an idea. And a second later, I started hearing footsteps. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. That maybe whoever's coming up the trail, a pretty remote location. So I was like, not a lot of people out. Like maybe this person has an idea. And I look up, and there wasn't a person, but there was a tarantula.
Oh, shit.
And it was so big. It was making, you could hear it walking through the grass. And I jumped out. I was never seen a tarantula before in my life. It was huge.
Not in the wild either, too.
Yeah. Well, I guess they, in August, they start mating out here in California. But yeah. And I jumped up, and I was like out of my mind. I just got back on the bike, and I was like really and I was like, wait, there's no accidents. That's interesting. So I started looking up what does it mean to see a tarantula? And the first thing that came up, it said the tarantula teaches us the balance between male and female energy. And writers tend to see this animal, and it helps you create a web of creativity through your writing. So I was like, oh my God. Okay. This is where I began.
So now you have a tarantula tattoo. Just kidding.
Now I have a tarantula tattoo.
It's your whole back.
Yeah, exactly. I have 3. No, so I just started playing around with tarantulas and looking at what they are. They have genus, phylum, species, order, Tarantulus arachnid, but the order is Araneae. So I was like, that's cool. And then the ideas started coming. Well, Araneae. Okay, so if I'm fighting the princess narrative, and I'm thinking that if kids read a princess narrative, they're going to go down a path of being this empty princess, then I should have an empty princess, and I'll name her Araneae after the spider I found. And then so this idea of this princess that has lost her empathy, and we're trying to find empathy. So I started playing around with the word empathy, and I found, okay, the only thing I can spell is pet hammy. I said, all right, Princess Araneae has lost her pet hammy. And that's how then everything just starts flowing. And then you have a place to go. You have a place to end up. But yeah, so to your question, try to write 20 minutes a day. But what I draw from everything. I draw from nature, friends, animals, whatever it is. It's there for a reason.
I love that you just leave yourself open. I think there's such a fear, and I've been this way myself, is you have to control everything, and you're focused so much on this, you won't have that spider moment. You won't have that sitting and going, oh, that is actually something. There's other things in this world because you get so centrally focused. So it is nice to kind of look out. I love what you, especially being a father. I watched all your videos of you interacting with kids, and like you can see the performer. You can see I mean, and like even when I was listening to the voiceovers, I was like, he should be doing voiceovers. Like, why is he like? Because you're obviously clearly have spent a lot of time doing it. Like how often and how important it is for you to really be in there with interacting with children? Because I know a lot of people, they write books, they put it out into the world, and that's really it. Whether they be children's book, adult books, whatever, you're not really interacting with your audience like that, and you're like going full bore into it, which I love.
Well, part of it's a personal thing, in the sense that when I first started writing and I brought it to a literary agent and they really wanted to do it, he brought it to 5 publishers in New York, and they all turned it down. And then they said, we can't. And the reason was, it's too long, it shouldn't rhyme, and there's too many books about pirates. So I don't,
they thought it was a book about pirates.
Because there's a boat. There's
the
no pirates. There's no pirates.
That's so publishing. Oh God.
And rhyming books are amazing because it teaches kids to remember better. It gives them a rhythm and when they begin to read it themselves, they know the rhythm before the word, and it helps to teach them to read. And too long, like I've seen a lot of children's books. They're
what about
short,
Dr.
Seuss? The older books are great.
Yeah,
and that's about. But no one has an attention span anymore. And we're reading kids these ridiculously short, snarky books that make no sense. And so what do? Well, I want to read 4 books before bed.
My son does that. That's exactly this. So this, and just keeps handing me.
Yeah.
Another one.
So kids have an appetite. They have an attention span. They want to be fed.
Yeah.
But we're giving them the stuff that is so short and disjointed. And so what I wanted to do was first just, sort of say fuck you to those people. So I put a pirate in my book because the publishers are never wrong. There's a little kid in the line that he's going up to when he's auditioning for Kate, and he's got a little sword and a pirate hat on. So I told the illustrator, I was like, just put a pirate in there just for me. Of course it's going to rhyme. Rhyming books are great. And it's more fun to write things that rhyme.
Sure.
And so to your question, is it something I read to kids when I do a reading? It'll be an hour and a half. And you saw in the video, sometimes it's up to 200 kids.
Yeah.
And I just want to show everybody, I can have 200 kids' attention for an hour and a half. So you can read this book to your kid at night for 6 minutes. They have the attention span. It's okay. So yeah, for me, it's a fun thing to show the parents and the teachers, like they really want this time. They want to be read to, but you got to do the voices and you got to have fun. Sometimes the kids will make you do the grandpa's voice or.
But you're perfect for it. But that's the thing. Like a normal author, it doesn't have, you think about everyone who writes it, if they do their audiobook, the author isn't the one doing the audiobook. They farm it out to somebody who has amazing voices and you do different dialects. But like you've got the whole pack. I mean, you get on that Wiggles game. You'll be doing like live performances, that kind of style.
There is a future to the series. And there's another book, and then I want to get into, possibly a TV series.
Animated for sure, yeah.
Yeah, definitely a feature film, musical, just like, just something like a Moulin Rouge for kids, something just so fun and fantastical. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
so what's something you learned about yourself in quarantine?
You know what? I can't say it's been bad for me. Since I moved out here, I've enjoyed alone time. I find being alone is really important. I like to be alone in nature. Sometimes I'll go camping alone. I don't like to be cooped up in the house, but I don't mind that.
Have you always been that way?
No, not at all.
I was the opposite of that. I hated being alone. I didn't know what to do with myself. I was so used to being a performer. You get that, instant gratification, and then you find that you're pouring that into a relationship, and you think that person's your audience, and they need to constantly give you that adulation, and you're, and it's hard it's hard once you finally get, it's better and easier once you get over that hump and going like, oh yeah, I like me, I'm cool with myself, like I can go
Yeah.
do things.
Yeah. And it hasn't been, I don't think it's been as hard for me as maybe a lot of people are saying it's been hard. I don't think, I mean, I walk the dog and, I'm not really a restaurant guy. I'd rather just go out camping. So I've been going camping a lot, but probably more so. Yeah, it's all right. I hope it ends soon, but I don't know whose job that is to say there's no more disease anymore. I don't get it.
Yeah, I don't know that. I mean, I think that we're always going to be living with some iteration of it, and I don't know it is weird that someone has the job to be able to tell you can't go to your job, but that's a whole nother podcast.
Yes, that's a whole nother thing that we don't know.
What's your greatest fear?
Oh God. That's I guess that's mine. I don't know. You could say you're afraid of drowning, but there is, I think our deep fears manifest in a physical fear. But I mean, what is it? My greatest fear? I'd have to really, really get to the bottom of that. I think that, I don't know. I don't know. What's yours?
This isn't about me. No. Failure.
I'm gonna keep my greatest fear.
Mine's failure. Real
close to my heart, so I'm always cognizant of where it is and what it is. But that's mine.
Yeah, mine would definitely be failure of not living up to my potential and not being the best that I can be. So I think that I don't want to be the old man who sits on the porch and wonders what if. So that's my...
Well, but you could not live up to your potential, but if you weren't wondering what if, there wouldn't be a problem. So maybe the real fear is wondering.
Oh, there you go. Now it's just like
that's the thing is I don't know what it really is. I know it's a great motivator though, and I know I don't have a problem with fear.
Yeah.
Because you can do a lot of creative things out of fear, Maybe that fear in you made you do this podcast because you were like, I'm not going to not live up to my potential. So we can.
I think it's an incredible motivator.
Yeah.
I just think that it's not something that I don't ever want to look back and be like, God, I wish I had done that podcast. I'd rather do it and fail and do a bunch. I mean, like I was a professional dancer, I've written books as well. Wrote a cookbook. I wrote with my ex. I became a chef. It's like for me, like I've never been afraid to pursue. That the fear has turned into creativity and has pushed me into doing something. And like I work my best when my back's against the wall. So I guess you could call that fear. That's a motivator for me. So, what's your most treasured possession?
My dog.
Your dog? What kind of dog is it?
I have a little beagle dachshund mix named Fazul.
Fazul? Why Fazul?
Fazul. I grew up on the East Coast and of Italian descent,
Fazul.
But there's something called pasta Fazul that you eat, and then in Connecticut and New York, it's a big Connecticut, but it's really a bastardization of the word fagioli, pasta I fagioli, which means pasta with beans. When I moved out here, no one knew what pasta Fazul was, so I just thought if I ever get a dog, I'm going to name him Fazul, so everyone has to say Fazul. And now they do. And I feel great. I feel like I'm back.
That leads into the story, and then you get to explain what it is.
And I feel at home every time someone meets my dog. They're like, hey, Fazul. And I'm like, I feel like I'm in New York.
Beautiful. How long were you in New York?
I was in New York for 5 years.
I did 10 years.
Did theater, did acting, that whole thing, and then came out here. And started doing TV and things like that.
Nice. So who are your heroes of fiction?
I guess one of my favorite books is Gates of Fire by Stephen Pressfield. And just that whole fantastical, world of either the past or the future. Starship Troopers is a good one. I think Pressfield's a great writer, and I really there's some moments in that book that I've had to sit down and just like write them out so that I just wouldn't forget them. I would have them forever.
So you like the fantasy.
That book. Yeah. Have you read that Gates of Fire book?
I have not read that. I know Starship Troopers really well, but I've never read that one.
Starship Troopers is kind of creepy in how he may have predicted everything that's happening.
And it is weird when that art imitates life, imitates art. So it's very.
In 1984, Brave New World, all those writers.
Speaking of art, what's up with that picture behind you? Where is that?
That's one of my favorite artists, Eric Nash.
It's killer.
Yeah, that's a painting.
That's a painting. Photorealism or.
Yeah, he came from a marketing background and used to do advertisement, but was a fantastic painter. I met him in Palm Springs. I saw the series, and I was born in '76, so it was
nice.
It was a gift from a friend of mine.
Very cool. So, I mean, I just love what you're doing. I can't wait to see what the next iteration is. And where can everybody find you?
You can go to katesfirstmate.com. I will sign every copy that's purchased online. There's a little note you can write if you have if it's for a child and you want me to write a note to the kids. I'll write them and I send them all out of here. And there's Kate's First Mate. That's the place to go. We're not doing it on Amazon. I'm trying to keep it all
organic.
Sort of small business.
Nice.
And there's Instagram is Kate's First Mate is the handle. And then we have a Facebook page as well.
Awesome.
So that's where all that information is. Yeah.
Well, my son Atlas is a fan. We read Kate and Nate, so he was engaged the whole time. And it was very, very successful. So the pictures are beautiful. So regardless of anything, that just draws them in. So it's amazing what you're doing. I love that you've kind of took all of your energy and put it into this path and much success to you going forward. It was a pleasure to chat with you.
Thank you. It was great to talk to you. I really appreciate you.
All right, brother. I'll talk to you later.
All right. Take care.